of D-126-15 due to failure noticed on his expedition was the strange quality.
Oh hi, it's been a year since we met. So yeah, it's been a year, basically. I wonder when the Scarlet King wants to destroy this world. But until then, I'm stuck in this fucking foundation, like normal. I just want to get over and done with, destroy the world and move on to the next world. But I have to wait until my dad says to do it. So I've no choice but to wait until my dad says, hey, come get me, set me free, then yeah, destroy the world. But until that day, nah, basically. Until that day.
Of the olive trees within the active zone, the bark was a stark white, and the leaves a bloody red. Up close, Herrick could see that the trunks and branches of the trees had undergone a process known as ossification, where the material slowly becomes bone or bone-like tissue. Hence the anomaly's creepy name, the Bone Orchard. These ossified trees became known as SCP-3989-1. Herrick also made another discovery. All over the trees and ground were worm-like creatures that looked like long maggots that the Foundation dubbed SCP-3989-1A. Agent Herrick then noticed something was off about the leaves of the ossified trees. They were beating. He looked closer and they appeared to be heart tissue filled with pumping veins. Dr. Gazzelli ordered Herrick to take a branch for testing, and when he did, the tree began to bleed. When he looked down, he saw that the worm-like creatures that covered the ground were now crawling up his legs. Ignoring orders from Dr. Gazzelli, Herrick fled from the active zone in terror. As he left, Dr. Gazzelli caught something in the corner of Herrick's body cam footage. A long, white hind limb disappearing behind a tree. Back in our normal dimension, tests on the sample Herrick collected yielded more upsetting discoveries. Genetically, the trees were identical to humans, the trunks were human bone, and the leaves really were made of human heart tissue. Fascinated and just a little bit horrified, Dr. Gazzelli authorized further expeditions into 3989-A.
Do you ever worry that you don't have any good skills? Are you looking to turn a passion into a profession?
Fuck off.
This time, though, Agent Herrick would be accompanied by another D-Class, and both would be armed with handguns and protective body armor. As it would turn out, this expedition would be even more horrifying than the first. As the two D-Classes explored the active zones to collect further samples, they found that the worms were responsible for the ossification of the otherwise non-anomalous olive trees. They consumed the wood little by little, and deposited human bone matter in return. Herrick and his companion also noticed that these trees were beginning to bear fruit. Dr. Gazzelli ordered Herrick to collect some of this fruit for testing, but when they attempted to remove the fruit, it burst, releasing more worm creatures. It seemed that the converted trees acted as incubators for their egg. Have you ever had a nightmare that you're running down a long, dark hallway, getting chased by something you can't see? The thing behind you isn't fast, but that doesn't matter. You can't run forever. The thing knows it. It is a patient predator. It toys with its food. At first you move with speed and rhythm. The metallic scraping noise behind you grows quieter. You run and stumble through the dark. Your muscles start to ache and your lungs burn. Your pace slows. It's still coming. You can hear the scraping getting louder. You start to panic. It's completely dark. You don't know where you're running or even what you're running from. All you know, as you bump against the walls and the sharp corners that rush towards you, is that you can't run forever. You trip, fall, and pain explodes through your legs as your knee shatters on the concrete ground. That scraping is getting louder. You can barely breathe. You can't run anymore with your injury. There's no way to stop what's coming. There is no escape. The scraping is right behind you. You scream, and then you wake up. Your heart is pounding like thunder in your chest, and your sheets are soaked with sweat, but you're safe. You're out of those awful dark hallways. But what if this wasn't just a nightmare? What if this scenario was real, and there was no escape from the horror chasing you in the darkness? That's what it's like to have a close encounter with SCP-1918, a sadistic sentient object that loves playing twisted games with its prey. But this monster never plays fair, and even worse, it's always just a simple doorway. It may even be hiding behind a door near you right now, waiting to start a game with its new playmate. But soon you'll understand why some doors should never, ever be opened, and why some games are better left unplayed. SCP-1918 is an anomaly with two parts, SCP-1918 itself and SCP-1918-2, the monster's underground lair. The duo are a match made in hell, as the chambers and hallways of 1918-2 are perfectly tailored to 1918's violent hobbies. Nobody knows how long this anomaly has been operating, but it's probably behind countless disappearances. After all, 1918 has a habit of breaking its toys.
Fuck off,
The nightmare
Ed.
began in a small town in Maine, with a population of only 226 people. But that population was about to get lower. People in the town began to report strange noises at night, a droning metal-on-concrete scraping noise, like someone dragging a lead pipe along the ground. At first, people just ignored the sound. It was all in their heads, or maybe just a faulty oven or a washing machine on the fritz. Anything that would allow them to forget about the noise and get on with their daily lives. But the noises were coming from below. They could be heard out on the streets, most audibly near manholes and sewer grates. People started feeling unsafe in their homes. The noises were spooking animals and children. People were losing sleep. That scraping they all tried to ignore was beginning to get to them all. Letters, emails, and angry phone calls to the town council were piling up. Something had to be done before the whole town went crazy with fear. The mayor authorized 4 utility workers to investigate the source of the noise at a local sewage treatment facility. Considering the scraping was loudest near the sewer grates, everyone just assumed that whatever was causing all this must be connected to the sewers. 4 utility workers were sent to investigate the facility, only to find that the machinery on site was working just fine. The source of the problems must have been coming directly from the underground sewer lines themselves. The 4 workers, equipped with headlamps, descended into a long service tunnel that fed into the sewer system. As they passed deeper into the tunnel, the darkness around them became thicker. It was a tangible presence that drowned out the light of their headlamps, similar to the anomalous phenomenon exhibited by SCP-087. When the utility workers tried to turn back, they discovered another impossibility. It seemed that the tunnel behind them had become a solid concrete wall. They were trapped, but where? It was too dark to tell. Confused and terrified, the 4 men stuck together, attempting to find a way out. It was too dark to see their hand in front of their face, so all they could do was navigate slowly by feeling the walls around them. These walls felt old, crusty. There was a kind of faint metallic stench hanging in the air too, like old blood. Something horrible had happened here, and something horrible was about to happen again. All they could do was keep moving and try to stay calm. Eventually, after hours of pawing at the walls in the dark, they found an open doorway. One by one, they filed inside, only to feel blinded when bright white ceiling lights suddenly switched on. The room was all white.
Let's have another joint.
Pipes, large and small, running from wall to wall. Just then, one of the utility workers let out an ear-splitting scream and pointed towards the doorway. His colleagues turned and gasped in shock. There was something outside the door, and it was staring at them. The observations. One researcher suggests that these pattern screamers are created by the way the psyche shatters when brought into contact with raw, true nothingness. The nothingness acts like a hateful mirror to our worst thoughts, reflecting them back at us in the
Let's pause it. Let's head to the cafeteria. Why not? I'm hungry. I'm fucking hungry, dude. Hey, can I have a burger, please? Sure, no problem. Give me a second. All good. Stay right there. SCP-001. I will. Here goes, sir. SCP-001. Thank you. Let's go sit down and eat, I guess. Oh, yum. Let's head out to the courtyard, I guess. It's another day in the Foundation. I can't wait until my dad says we can destroy this world. But until then, I'm fucked. I'm stuck at a fucking Foundation, cunt. Press play.
And becoming infected themselves. If the containment fails, it's their job to throw the kill switch on the D-Class observers to prevent them from becoming vectors for infection. Today, this job fell on Dr. Julia Reed. She was linked to the two observers via an audio feed, allowing her to remain in constant contact with them. And she had her finger on the activation key for a pair of explosive collars that were around the D-Class's necks. Little did they know, Dr. Reed's heart was its own time bomb. Now you know what we're up against. A snap-happy sculpture, and a teleporting death statue with a hit list containing everyone who's ever glanced at it. What can SCP-131 bring to the table? The two small cycloptic anomalies have only one remarkable ability. They never blink. That, and a soft spot for humans. First, they're sour.
Fuck off.
These safe-class SCPs pose
Let's have a
no threat to
join.
their handlers, and can even form attachments to researchers and other staff who show affection towards them. Of course, forming these bonds is discouraged by Site-19's director, because it can be distracting, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. The two iPods, known as SCP-131a and SCP-131b, are identical in appearance except for their colors. A is a burnt orange, and B is a mustard yellow. The two of them appear to communicate with one another via high-pitched squeaking noises, and also seem to have an innate ability to detect danger occurring in the vicinity, as well as danger occurring near individuals they've bonded with. Because of their inability to cause harm and their generally affectionate demeanor, the iPods are allowed to roam around Site-19, provided they keep out of the way of researchers and stay out of restricted areas. They seem to pretty much stick to the rules, though check-ins on A and B are required every hour, just to be safe. As the iPods were moving freely around the facility, Trevor and another D-Class maintained a visual on the sculpture in its containment chamber, while a third man swept up the mixture of blood and excrement staining the concrete floors. Things were going fine, until Trevor's migraine got the better of him. A sudden flash of intense pain shot through his head, and in a moment of weakness, he made a terrible mistake. With an audible groan of pain, Trevor closed his eyes and forced his fingers to his temples. The groan had taken his fellow observer off guard, and the man's eyes flitted over to him for a fraction of a second. But a fraction of a second is all the sculpture needs. In an instant, Trevor and his fellow watcher had their necks snapped, and the third D-Class was murdered before he even had a chance to turn around. Containment protocol dictates that the door is to be sealed behind the cleaning crew while they're working with 173. But this time, perhaps due to complacency, the guards had neglected to reinforce the door. They got their heads twisted 180 degrees for their trouble. SCP-173 was loose. Mobile task forces were dispatched to aid in the recontainment effort as 173 began wreaking havoc around the facility. But things were about to get even worse. It seemed like business as usual over at the containment cell of SCP-689. Two D-Classes observed while Dr. Reed dictated to them over an earpiece from her control center. However, what Dr. Reed thought were just minor chest pains were actually the onset of heart failure. When the two D-Classes heard their supervisor experiencing a fatal heart attack on the other end of the line, they began to panic. This meant their attention wasn't entirely on SCP-689, and they were further distracted by the chaos SCP-173 was causing elsewhere in the facility, murdering researchers, guards, and maintenance workers alike, which led to power outages. The lights in 689's containment cell shut down, Guards were dispatched to execute the observers, as is protocol for 689 containment breaches. But the fact that resources were already stretched thin by the 173 breach caused a fatal error in judgment from a guard posted nearby. In a panic, he opened the door to find one D-Class dead, with the statue perched on his body, and the other one running straight for him in blind fear. The two collided and tumbled out into the hall. Both were now infected by 689's anomalous attention, and both were now doomed. Moments later, the two of them were dead, the statue perched on their bodies, accidentally catching the eye of several researchers and guards running to deal with the 173 situation. For these two deadly anomalies, it was becoming an all-you-can-kill buffet. The staff of Site-19 were now dealing with one anomaly that needed to be looked at constantly, and another that if you even glance at it, you are effectively infected with a fatal disease. The iPods, sensing an imminent danger nearby, immediately sprung into action. It would be up to these cute, harmless anomalies to save the terrified staff during this chaotic double containment breach. In a nearby hallway, a fleeing Foundation researcher heard the crunches of her colleagues' necks breaking behind her. 173 was getting closer. This thing couldn't be outrun. She turned and saw the statue standing there, just 10 feet away from her. A dead researcher laying on the ground in front of it. She was locked in a deadly staring contest with the sculpture. How long she could survive was now dependent on how long she could keep her eyes open, and it was getting harder by the second. She could feel her eyes drying. They burned under the ceiling lights. 173 just waited. This wasn't a contest. She could win. In a final moment of terror, the researcher was forced to finally close her eyes and she waited for the crunch. But it never came. Instead, she heard familiar high-pitched squeaking noises. She opened her eyes, crying tears of relief, as she saw Scp-131a sitting behind 173, watching it with its constant, unblinking gaze. The killer sculpture was paralyzed by a cheerful little safe-class anomaly. Across the facility, a similar situation had unfolded with SCP-689. The Statue of Death had claimed many lives, but SCP-131b had swooped in and frozen the statue in place with its never-ending gaze. Soon after, a mobile task force with vision-blocking visors used advanced echolocation technology to collect SCP-689 and return it to its containment cell. Everyone who'd seen the anomaly was, as standard protocol dictates, gathered up for later termination. Meanwhile, a mobile task force returned the paralyzed 173 back to its containment cell with a forklift. No containment breach is ever a picnic. Containment breaches with multiple dangerous anomalies are even less so. But the heroic role that SCP-131 played in bringing things back under control was indispensable. After all, it's not just raw power that counts when it comes to anomalies. The only anomalous power 131 needed to save the entire site was its ability to keep looking when nobody else could. They're so effective in this role that they've been seriously considered for permanent roles as wardens for SCPs like 173 and 689. And in our opinion, they're more than qualified. Now check out SCP-999, the Tickle Monster.
Tickle Monster is weak.
A swarm of bloodthirsty entities waits outside the protective boundary that surrounds the solar system. They surge through the vacuum of space. Calvin Lucian stands at the end of a dusty table in an abandoned warehouse. In the shadows across from him, nowhere is more secure than an SCP Foundation.
Fuck
You hear their
off.
footsteps coming down the halls. Or are those your own? Can you even tell the difference? You can tell they're getting closer and you can feel the hate, the rage. You turn, shaking, and finally see them standing right in front of you. But in that moment, you might as well be looking into a mirror. And who knows? Perhaps you are. You just don't seem to remember having so many reflections. Have you ever heard the saying, you are your own worst enemy? Of course, it isn't usually meant literally. But what if it was? What if you had to fight a monster that was you? All of your flaws are reflected back at you. Your strengths, your weaknesses, your deepest fears, with no way to escape except a battle to the death. Either way, you're not making it out alive. It's just a matter of which version of you survives. But this isn't a thought experiment. No, according to the findings of the SCP Foundation, it's very much a reality. There is a place where this nightmare comes to life, and it's known as SCP-1919. SCP-1919 is a hotel and converted mansion built in the early 20th century. From the outside, it looks pretty much like it did when it was first built, and it almost looks like a comfortable place to stay, if you ignore the eastern side of the building that is sunk partially into the ground. The inside, however, is a different story, where it's clear the ravages of time have taken their toll. The floorboards and ceilings are rotting, collapsing in on themselves, and the rooms are filled with debris. It's deadly enough to explore the hotel for these reasons alone, but this is only the beginning of the danger for a person inside. In order to determine just how dangerous it is for either one person or group to enter the structure, the SCP Foundation planned a series of research expeditions into the abandoned building, led by Foundation scientist Dr. Lemkowitz. The first expedition seemed relatively normal, at least it did at the start. A 39-year-old Caucasian D-class male, known as D7, was sent into the structure with a camera and a communication system, guided remotely by Dr. Lemkowitz, or Dr. L, and another operative, a former head of the MTF Tau 11 Youth Hostiles, who is referred to in this file only as T11. When he arrived at the building, D7 was unable to get inside through the front door or windows. After several minutes of trial and error, he was finally able to get in through the western entrance.
We took another join.
A strange, high-pitched whistling noise upon D7's entrance into the building, but it quickly faded away and was disregarded by T11. D7 discovered a torn painting, a portrait of a young woman with red hair. Next to the portrait, shallow scratches could be seen in the wall, the floor, and